Okay, I've been talking about this book. This is the third one I want to talk, third video I've done about the Empire of Normality by Robert Chapman, which is looking at neurodiversity through a Marxist lens. And last time he talked, in the video I'm talking about what Robert Chapman has been outlining in the book. So he looked at the antipsychiatry movement and SAS. And SAS became a fierce critic not just of psychoanalytic psychiatry, but the very concept of mental illness. And psychoanalytic theory was the, Freud was the main person in that field, although many other psychoanalytic analysts came out of in his wake. But SAS, in his book The Myth of Mental Illness, thought psychiatry was a form of control, but SAS didn't challenge the concept of biological or neurological normality. His argument was against the mental part. His argument rested on a comparison between what he took to be objective bodily medicine and value-laden psychiatry. He thought psychiatry was based on subjective judgment and not an objective biological test. On the other hand, many patients did and still do find it helpful to see their psychological problems as mental illness or disability. Many found state and professional support helpful. Other anti-psychiatry figures thought that the denial of mental illness to be absurd. It was David Cooper who coined the term anti-psychiatry in 1967, but SAS's became the dominant counter-narrative. Anti-psychiatry helped rapidly speed up a major shift that started in the 1950s, the closing of the asylums, and helping to change public perception more quickly. Someone called Skull spoke of a curious political alliance. On the left, a fierce opposition to the incarceration of the mentally ill in places that resemble prisons or warehouses for the unwanted. But then on the right, a libertarianism that hated public provision of services of any sort, coupled with the promise of fiscal savings, made closure of state hospitals equally irresistible. There was thus a shift from asylum to community care. By the end of the 1970s, almost all the old asylums had closed. Now, SAS believed that people self-identified as mentally ill mainly to take on a sick role that allowed them to avoid taking personal responsibility for dealing with their problems in living. Liberal capitalists had long been worried about malingerers, people pretending to be ill to avoid responsibility centred on the individual. Essentially, SAS saw patients as morally weak liars, pretending to be ill, rather than unwell people in need of medical assistance. I'm trying to blot out that. There's a hedge cutter outside, really loud. It's one of those noises. Anyway, SAS saw the myth of mental illness as much a myth made and sustained by patients as it was made by psychiatrists. In his 2008 book, Psychiatry, Science of Lies, he wrote, "So-called mentally ill persons pretend to be disabled by illnesses that do not exist." The ultimate implication of accepting this view was not only that state support and psychiatric diagnosis should be abolished, but claiming to be mentally ill was really a form of lying to oneself and others to avoid responsibility for dealing with life's problems. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the worldview of SAS returned to a pre-medical view where mental illness was understood in the moral rather than medical sphere. His politics also anticipated the neoliberalism that would begin being imposed around 1979, the virtues of independence, self-reliance, and the willingness to bear risks. SAS's ideas fitted into a broader form of capitalist individualism that would culminate in the global adoption of Hayek's politics in the 1980s. Chapman mentions a lot about different economic models and economists, but I might do that in another section. But SAS assumed bodily medicine, by contrast, dealt with objective abnormalities of the body, yet Sedgwick contended that conceptions of bodily illness were no less value-laden. It had become clear to critics that Sassonism was mostly convenient for framing unwell people as work-shy malingerers and thus justifying cuts to services and welfare. So it may look as if Sass bought into the Sass bought into the pathology paradigm, although it might look as if he superficially challenged it. Now, I just wanted to say that I have been, this is me now, I've been campaigning against the welfare cuts and since, you know, the welfare reform bill, and many of us have, and this idea of malingerers and the sick role and all this sort of stuff has been levelled and has helped demonise people with genuine disabilities and health problems, and it's not just so a lot of autistics will suffer. Most of us will have anxiety is one of our main symptoms, and you know, it's even today we can see it in people like, well, the last DWP minister Mel Stride was talking about people being a bit bluesy. You know, they're always having a go at people with just anxiety and depression as if they're not real. This business about the sick role, it's all if you've been through an ESA assessment, it's horribly judgmental, it's horribly dehumanizing, and many people have come back with reports from the assessors, completely different, completely inventing what the person said or completely downplaying that whatever their conditions are, and it's as if you have a lot of people with autism also have coexisting conditions like fibromyalgia. I have that. ME, I have that. And you know, I know many people have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility syndrome, and all these things are, you know, they're ridiculed. You know, there's a sort of been a sort of assault on people with chronic health conditions and all this thing that, so coming back to Robert Chapman, all that he's saying in this book, going back to that, is this idea of the myth of, you know, it's very much been incorporated into our the way the services are run. So you know, the DWP is run whole, you know, the whole thing is that you're assumed to be faking it or lying, or you need, you know, your doctor isn't to believe, and all this sort of thing. And I must say, it just did begin before 1979, because we saw this thing in, you know, I read the Ragged Trouser Philanthropist. It's all in there 100 years ago, this moral idea of, you know, and it goes back to the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. But anyway, next time I shall talk about behaviourism as it's mentioned in the book. So thank you for watching and listening. Bye for now.